So, okay.
I'm sorry. Okay. Hello, everyone. This is a short welcome and introduction. I think welcome to this webinar on war, genocide, and resistance in West Asia in particular. Today, 3 organizations have come together to organize this webinar: the Asia-Europe People's Forum, the Transnational Institute, and the International Peace Bureau. The Asia-Europe People's Forum is an interregional network of progressive civil society organizations across Asia and Europe. And since 1996, the AEPF has remained the only continuing network linking Asia and Europe NGOs, social movements, and even parliamentarians at some point. It has assumed the unique function of fostering people's solidarity across the 2 regions and has become a vehicle for advancing the people's voice within Asia-Europe relations, and it hopes to do so in the coming years. The Transnational Institute, as many of you have already known, is an international research and advocacy institute committed to building a just, democratic, and sustainable planet. And for over 50 years, the NI has served as a unique nexus between social movements, engaged scholars, and policymakers. And the International Peace Bureau, a Nobel laureate in 1910 for its dedication to the vision of world without war. It remains to work on programs that centers on disarmament for sustainable development, that focuses on reallocation of military spending, and also through its new program, the common security campaigns. The IPB supports a range of disarmament campaigns and supply data on the economic dimensions of weapons, like and conflicts. This is the main work on nuclear disarmament, which began way back in 1980. I also would like to acknowledge our IPB team at our Berlin office for providing us the technical support today, and also that is to say that the webinar is also being live streamed in several channels. So I hope that Michelle or whoever is in charge of doing this could share the links in the chat box. So finally, join me in welcoming 2 colleagues, longtime friends, who will moderate our webinar today. Anu Chenoy of Asia-Europe People's Forum, who is also deeply involved in the work of TNI and IPB. And of course, Chris Van Slombroek of 11-11-11, and of course, a member of the International Organizing Committee of the Asia-Europe People's Forum. So Anu and Chris, please take it away and do the rest.
Thank you. Thank you, Cora, for this. And I have the privilege of introducing our wonderful panel today. First, we have Professor Gilbert Achka. He is a professor at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. He is a prolific writer, and I'm sure, in this current context, you would have seen some of his work. Of course, his latest book is on the Gaza catastrophe. His other books include The Arabs and the Holocaust, The New Cold War, Perilous Power, which he co-authored with Noam Chomsky, and many others. And if you have not read any of these, it would be good if you do. Then we have Nadine Sherani. Nadine is the International Advocacy Officer at Contras, based in Indonesia. and very active in this, in the anti-war and pro-Palestine movement. Then we have Muhammad Artino Abdullah, who is a Syrian activist and war photographer who had joined the Syrian uprising in 2011. He has documented the conflicts from the front lines. He's worked with Reuters and later contributed to the humanitarian efforts in the besieged eastern Ghouta. Then he resettled in Belgium in 2015, working with several NGOs on advocacy and campaigning with the Syria campaign, Syria Archive, Women Now. In 2022, he joined 1111 as an advocacy officer focused on the Middle East and Northern Africa region. And then our fourth speaker is Imad Kiai, who is the director of Middle East Treaty Organization and an activist on the elimination of WMDs in the Middle East. So now I would ask Professor Achkar.
Yes, yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Anu, for the introduction. Thanks to all the organizers for organizing this event, and greetings to all, whether it's a good morning or a good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. I mean, let's start with war, since that's the major topic that we're dealing with in this session. Just think of the distance we've been through since the end of the past century. The end of the past century, as everyone knows, was marked by the end of what used to be called the Cold War, the first Cold War between the Soviet Union and the Western Bloc led by the United States. And this end of the Cold War seemingly heralded, an era of peace, peace dividends that swords would be turned into plowshares. The world would become much more peaceful and much more. The key part of this money that used to be spent on means of destruction would be spent on development, on fighting poverty and the rest. So you had this big promise. And the paradox, of course, was already that one of the first key moments of this post-Cold War was a war. The war launched by the United States against Iraq in 1991. Except that this war was launched under the banner of a UN authorization. The UN Security Council endorsed this war, and that was supposed to be a war for the implementation of international law, which had been violated by Iraq in invading Kuwait the year before, in 1990. And that's when Bush Sr., who was president at the time, described this war as the beginning of a new world order, which would be based on the rule of law internationally. Well, we can measure the distance since then, and the deep hypocrisy of the US discourse in this regard, since by the end of the same decade, that is 1999, the US was already violating this international law in a blatant manner with the launching a war against Serbia about Kosovo by circumventing the UN Security Council. And very few years later, you had the series of war that followed 9/11, but most importantly, invasion of Iraq in 2003 under Bush Jr. this time, and in another blatant violation, even more blatant, of international law and every kind of rule of international politics. And I mean, the so-called New World Order was completely shattered, and we entered increasingly into this lawless world in which we are, where the law of the jungle, that is the might is right principle, is predominant, completely predominant. And look at where we've got with all this. Look at the world today. You have a major war in the heart of Europe between the Russia-Ukraine war. You have a genocide that is going on in Palestine. You had the beginning of a war between India and Pakistan, two nuclear powers that would have been a catastrophe had this evolved beyond the initial stage. You have wars going on in various parts of Africa and the rest of and Asia, from Burma to Congo to other places. So anything but the New World Order and the peaceful future that was promised very few decades ago. And the core reason for this is this blatant violation of all rules, first by the strongest, the mightiest of all powers, which is the United States of America. And this has led to a major discredit of liberalism itself, and the ideology that the United States proclaimed. And this in itself has been a key factor in the development of what I called the age of neo-fascism, in which we entered through the progress of neo-fascist forces globally. You can find them everywhere, from India with Narendra Modi to Hungary with Orban or other European countries, to Latin America. You have Milei today, you had Bolsonaro yesterday, and of course the culmination of that with the second coming, if one could say, of Donald Trump in the White House, with a second mandate, which was much openly and clearly neo-fascist than anything the United States has seen before. And so that's where we are in this context. And it is in this context that the neo-fascist, neo-Nazi coalition ruling Israel was able to and is still able to perpetrate a genocide, which is the first televised genocide in history. I mean, this is the first time a genocide is going on. It has been going on for such a long time under the eyes of the whole world. It's not that it is something that has been discovered after the fact. This time we are all witnesses to what is going on, and that tells you a lot about the terrible situation that we are, not to mention other behaviors, aggressive behaviors of Israel around the whole surrounding area, from Lebanon to Syria to Iran. This has been a pattern, but this pattern is very much part of the global situation in which we are, and the main culprit in this regard being the United States of America, given its role in fostering all this. That doesn't excuse other powers like Russia or the rest, but this is a fact that must be underlined.
Okay, thank you, Professor. That was very a first say round where we dig a bit deeper in the context where we are today. I would like to invite now Nadine. Nadine, as an officer with Contras, a human rights organization, but also very much involved in, say, activism in Indonesia and beyond. Nadine, Indonesia being the largest, most populated Muslim country in the world, how does the public opinion look at this this conflict, and especially in West Asia? What are say NGOs trying to generate, and also, do you see a change in the mood since, let's say, October 7 and now?
Okay. Thank you so much, Chris. And hi, everyone. Good evening from Jakarta. I'm Nadine from Contrast. So, legally wise, the public condemns genocide, of course, and occupation as something that has occurred to Indonesia before its independence. It is also written specifically in our Indonesian constitution preamble that states, whereas independence is truly the right of all nations, and therefore colonization in the world shall be abolished, and it is not in accordance with humanity and justice. End quote. Hence, the Indonesian constitution itself is providing some sort of foundational moral to Palestine's rights to self-determination. And this also sets the tone for Indonesian civilians, including those who are also a part of the majority group known as the Muslim community, to implement this in any way as possible. And historically speaking, also, Palestine was also one of the earlier supporters to Indonesia's independence back in 1945, before it was being colonized by Israel. So this has bring more to a friendly gesture, a friendly diplomatic ties to Indonesia until this moment. Although it is inevitable when we see that the public, specifically the Muslim community, as one of the largest community in Indonesia, emphasizes differently to Palestine based on their religious significances. For example, we have the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem as the third holiest state aside from Mecca, aside from Medina, since it was a sacred place for the Prophet Muhammad had his night journey. So by defending this mosque, this Al-Aqsa Mosque itself is like a part of the Islam's biggest religious duty. And it is still one of the reasons, the prominent reasons of why the Islamic movement is so strong in Indonesia for Palestine. And there is also this pan-Islamic solidarity called Ummah. And you can see this in many social media platforms by the Islamic community of Indonesia, where the level of empathy is deeply rooted by one of the sayings of Islam: the believers are like one body. If one part suffers, the whole body feels the pain. So this is where solidarity also stems from the Indonesian Muslim community, and I believe also it is also stemming in Malaysia. But now moving towards rallies, movements, the resilience of the Indonesian civil society for Palestine, I dare enough to say that movements have been very much broad. It has been very much creative, as it sets more tone when the Indonesian government can't do more, when the Indonesian government at this point is just a bystander. The civil society wants to prove a point that Indonesia can do more. There is this thing called the Indonesian way of solidarity to Palestine. For example, just 2 weeks ago, we were struck by the news regarding the capture of the Madeline boat, and how these activists are far braver than the state actors in sending directly humanitarian aid to Gaza. So the civil society decided that we should have a visit to this state actors, to this diplomatic offices in Indonesia, when their citizens are being kept detained. We don't know whether they have been tortured at that time by the IDF, but they are remaining silent. So we showed them, we we held rallies in front of these embassies, and we also gave an urgent appeal for immediate release for their own civilians. And from Germany to French to Sweden and many more. And even we experienced this one unique moment where the UK embassy even did a lockdown to their own workers so that they don't want to hear our protest. They don't want to have these civilized conversations with the Indonesian community. And we also did this global march for Gaza in the two biggest cities of Indonesia's Jakarta and also Bandung, and also several sub-districts such as Depok. And just last Friday, we also had um, an Indonesian Gaza cycle rally. So these movements, and not also, also including the daily movements as boycotting to huge campaigns, to huge companies that are profiting Israel, such as McDonald's, Starbucks, and many others, are still quite massive. However, the question still is, where is Indonesia government at the moment when these rallies are going? These movements, let me tell you, audiences, are not being entirely supported by the state, since we know that this is a very open book situation, that Indonesia have always and always been two-faced in its foreign policy and stance towards Palestine. Statements we assess have been getting weaker and weaker, as it is also getting more difficult for us to prove its sincerity. For instance, on November 2024, the Vice Minister of the Indonesian Foreign Affairs stated in front of the members of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation that all members should sever all economic ties, trade, investment ties with Israel. But what happens after that statement? In 2024, wholly, from January to December 2024, Indonesia has an amount of profit to 128 million US dollar, profiting only from Israel. And just a half of 2025 started, Indonesia gained an extra profit of 73 million US dollar, also from Israel. And ironically speaking, military tools was also one of the most wanted quote unquote product of export and import. And this goes to show how the pursuit of economic benefits with Israel appears to take more precedence over the commitment to justice and human rights for Palestinians. And contrast alongside with other civil society organizations have been sending the letters of urgent letters to stop this trade and other economic ties with Israel. And to note that Indonesia have always been underlining that Indonesia has no diplomatic ties with Israel. At least what I received from the Jerusalem Post back in 2024, Indonesia is secretly normalizing engagement and diplomatic ties with Israel by importing these military tools, this monitoring tools to monitor what the civil society is doing in Indonesia. And whenever we send out these letters to stop trade, to stop normalizing ties with Israel as time goes by, we only receive a notification from the Ministry of Trade that contrasts and other Indonesian civil society organizations have no legal standing to ask for information. Who are the ministries which are using and exporting these products to and from Israel? Who are the government agencies? What are the bodies that are using or exporting these products to Israel? None. So concluding this, this is a step on the back for civilians who have been consistently boycotting since 2023, when the BDS campaign gradually showed up. And this is also backlashing with how Indonesia has been so angelic and so godly in stating Palestine's self-determination, but never really stated that what Israel did is a part of genocide. And to close this, it is our grave concern that when Prabowo, out of nowhere, on the 28th of May 2025, he stated that Indonesia may consider recognizing the sovereignty of Israel if the entity acknowledges the existence of Palestine and to stop attacking Palestine. But we are wondering actually, who is this Indonesia that he is representing? Surely the people of Indonesia would rather have Israeli authorities went through the international court's decision and severe punishment because what they did were illegal occupations and considered as genocide. So rather than speaking up as representing Indonesia in recognizing this, he's only representing his own values and not the resilience of the people of Indonesia. So I may stop there first. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nadine. And I think what you said reflects so much of other states of which I have the experience, a wide gap between what the leadership and the regime is saying versus what people feel and want. So now I call upon Imad K. And I hope, Imad, you can, because you're so linked with the region, you can tell us something, especially on the ground, what's happening there. Yeah, Imad.
Well, thank you so much, Anu, and to all the organizers for this timely event. There's so much happening that it was very difficult for me as I was gathering my thoughts. Where do I start and where do I end this intervention? But let's quickly just have a lay of the land. You have a Middle East, West Asia, however you want to consider this geography, that it's bleeding and is in multiple military and violent conflicts that are raging across, from Sudan to Libya, to Iraq, to Lebanon, to Yemen, to Syria, and now Iran and Palestine. And we see the hopelessness that is creeping in terms of like, how do we actually have an exit strategy on what is happening? Before we get to possible pathways forward, it is important to acknowledge that the Israeli government and its military and the system that is geared towards using violence as a means to resolve its dispute with others has failed. Not only have we are seeing that in a strip of land called Gaza, that the Israeli government and military attacks and violations of every norm and international legality has inflicted tremendous physical and psychological harm to the people living there, but has not been able to defeat the resistance that is coming out of Gaza. It is not even able to occupy, mind you, take over even parts of this strip of land. I'm highlighting this because it is a failure to believe that the security of one is at the expense of the insecurity of the other. And this has been the notion and policy of the Israeli government, that through bombs, through the barrel of the gun, through further oppression, through division, through segregation, through occupation, it is able to secure what it desperately needs, which is security. And this is the basis of the engulfment that we see in the region. And its latest attacks, which again violate every international norm on Iran's nuclear facilities and military sites and civilian infrastructure, highlights again the desperation of the Israeli government and its military in trying to find a way to at least appease its own people in terms of the semblance of security. That being said, it's without going around the words, what Israel has, government and military has inflicted on Iran is damaging. Iranian nuclear facilities have been damaged, and dragging the United States into this 12-day war resulted in key Iranian nuclear facilities to be bombed for the first time with one of the most heinous and most powerful bombs we've ever seen dropped since the end of the Second World War. Even then, they were unable to dismantle or achieve their status goals of making Iran's nuclear program obsolete, and in doing so, decapitate the governance structure of the Iranian government. So even there, they have failed. So it begs to question, where in their thinking do they believe is the end game for this amount of unleashing of violence? And as previous speakers have spoken, what is the pulse on the streets may not be reflective of the policies of governments in the region and in the broader Islamic Muslim world. But what is interesting is that the latest attack by Israel on Iran resulted in what I saw as quite a nuanced and refreshing condemnation by key Persian Gulf countries, which previously would have just sided with the Americans and the Israelis. And you saw that condemnation coming out from the Gulf Cooperation Council, from the NAM countries, from BRICS Plus, and from a number of countries from the global south. And that in itself is another added layer that we should really acknowledge. While we are in an era of, as you mentioned, might is right, and a new fascism, that the blatant abuse of power is now the norm. And we have belligerent leaders both in Washington and in Israel and elsewhere. And I want to bring in NATO here, because it is without saying that what Israel and the United States were able to do to Iran and to other countries that Israel is violent towards doesn't come in a vacuum. We have to identify the source and the support that is coming their way. And here again, the NATO countries have played an important role in facilitating and providing the technology, the satellite imagery, the intelligence, the equipment, the weaponry for this means of war to continue and this destruction to continue. Therefore, as we see the world sort of taking their hands off and saying, what can we do in this time? There is a few lines of glimmer of hope. And I think here is where I want to at least focus my last 2 minutes on, because I don't know about you, but as an Iranian and as a person who's at the Middle East Treaty Organizer, working with Palestinians, with Israelis, with people from across the region and beyond, on how do we push forward a regional approach to addressing key security matters, may that be human security, state security, or environmental security. We are in a position where we need an injection of hope. And here I want to evoke the idea that runs quite deep in Iranian culture of a phoenix, where in the ashes rises the phoenix. And we see the destruction and dismantlement of so many of our communities across the region. But in the same time, we see the resilience. We see the people from across the world sending and voicing their opposition to this violence. And as long as this voice and these actions continue and pierce through the arrogance and the carte blanche that a few have in terms of unleashing such violence, there is a glimmer of hope that there is a possibility for change. And what does that change look like? And here we have to provide an alternative vision for a region that is embroiled in so much chaos. And at least from my organization's perspective and ideas, is about how do we push forward a regional security apparatus that brings in the nations and their people to acknowledge that we cannot wait or cannot rely on external powers to resolve our own differences, that there is legitimate concerns on many of our communities and nations, between them, within them, that needs to be put onto the table, that the alternative that we see is quite simple: total annihilation, which is, of course, we don't want, or using all the tool sets that have been developed over centuries on how do we resolve conflict. Because conflict is not the issue. is we can have conflict between ourselves, within our communities. Conflict is not the matter. How do we resolve it is the issue. And here, as long as the Israeli government and belligerent governments such as the United States believe that might is right and continue that and find themselves in the aftermath of every military operation, seeing that they have not secured their goals, they haven't secured their security, and Israel as again a geography and its people are stuck in an area that have very two contrasting options ahead for them. Either they support and continue the means of war, or they see the value in a collective security that acknowledges that Palestinians have the right to self-determination, that other countries have sovereignty, and it requires for all of us to be able to sit around the table to negotiate. And if you think that this is impossible, I want to bring you attention to already an existing framework where 23 out of 24 nations of the Middle East, plus the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, with the exception of Israel and the United States, negotiating a treaty text that eradicates all weapons of mass destruction from the Middle East. Now, while US and Israel are excluded or not there by their own virtue, the seats are there, they just don't want to walk through it. The fact that we have the Arab countries and Iran and other world powers, including China, Russia, Britain, France, sitting together negotiating a treaty text shows volumes about what is other possibilities at our hands. And I will leave it here. Hopefully in the Q&A, we can get deeper into the fallacy of the belief that Israeli government and its military can somehow secure any semblance of security for its own people and for its own government through the barrel of the gun. And at the end of the day, the tide has changed. As been said by Gilbert and others, this is an era where we get information on our palms and we are seeing it live, what is happening to the Palestinians in Gaza and West Bank, and no longer are we in the shadows. And that is about us acknowledging it, recognizing it, and our consciousness awaken to the idea that there is no end in this unless we together as a global community of willing people showcase this. Don't let it be brushed to the side, and find our own ways in whatever locale we are to do our part, including what we're seeing in Indonesia, what we're seeing across Europe by not allowing arms to be put on ships bound for Gaza. So we have to find these glimmers of hope, amplify it, shed light on it, give it the energy it needs, and hopefully, inshallah, we can find a way forward for a region that has the potential to be prosperous, has the potential to be secure, has the potential to be peaceful, and to contribute enormously to our humanity as a family. Thank you.
Thank you, Imad, for this very moving, witnessing, and I think, yeah, that's also what brings us together here at this webinar, and that we all believe that this world at some point has to be a better place for all of us. And somebody who also lived through this his entire life is Artino, our next guest. Artino, as Syrian, I think you can very much link up with Imad's call for this humanity. Artino, how did you get involved in this activism that brought you as a photographer, but also as an activist in the streets of Damascus? How did you get there, and how did your kind of activism evolve throughout these years?
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris, and thanks you for everyone. There's a lot of moving words, of course, coming from my colleagues who spoke before me. As just a human being, born in Syria and was raised in Syria, working in just something totally different from being as an activist, working in Apple computers when the uprising started in Syria, and living, unfortunately, for more than 54 years of dictatorship era, we had no choice as a new generation is to go out in the streets and start trying to talk about dignity and trying to find our rights as a human rights. But unfortunately, we were faced with a lot of things that happens. Most of the world know what happens in Syria. And as a hobby that I was just taking pictures, I joined the uprising in Syria in the streets, protesting. A lot of things that happens through that. But giving my kind of testimony, who've been through from kind of peaceful protests into war, into living under siege for 2.5 years, witnessing an awful kind of lethal weapons that's been launched by the Syrian regime. And now, unfortunately, for the past years, everyone's been seeing it. That's been happening in the strife of Gaza. It just comes to me that the most what we do is that as a human being is to be direct and be basic on our rights, which is the basic rights stand for our basic rights and say no for the genocide and try to be go in the streets and ask for our rights. The most important things that it was really important that we have been doing for the past, let's say, unfortunately, 2 years is also not only talking that this is happening on daily, that we are now talking, even now there's a lot of bombing happening and there's a lot of violations being committed against this, the Palestinians in Gaza and every other also area and region of Palestine, but also spreading the awareness about this kind of acts, this kind of violations didn't start from like 2 years. It's been happening for the more than 74 years in Palestine itself. But it's really important that at least the new generation now that's using all social media, all that technology is no more internationally about what's happening in Palestine, in Gaza. It's really important. Being an activist on the ground and especially working with different kind of NGOs give me the kind of like the reflect on how we can join forces, not only as a public pressure on the ground, but also joining online and physical kind of campaigns that could help into the international kind of like public pressure. That's what we witnessed, let's say, in the few weeks ago in Netherlands, in The Hague, and also in Brussels. In Brussels itself, there were more than 100,000 people where took the streets with wearing red, with the kind of symbolism of end the genocide in Gaza, and together in also in Den Haag, in Netherlands, also more than 150,000 people. But when we talk about this kind of movement that's been happening, of course, there is kind of people who's organizing this, us as an organizations, but also the more awareness that people are having from the streets, the more that is pushing for taking the actions, taking the lead themselves. This is what's the most important things that's been leading. But also joining forces with organization is helping kind of changing the policies that have been happening. Keeping the narrative alive, that's what's going on, is the most important, but also pushing our decision makers, pushing our politicians towards kind of making stronger kind of actions, not only just being being diplomats about what's happening. Unfortunately, people are being killed, being suffering, and being also forced to be displaced. Myself, I've been unfortunately forced displaced from Syria since 2015, but it was my first time that I'm visiting Syria this year. It wasn't an easy, of course, to be far from my family, my mom and dad. There was no even sight for this to see it. And also it's the same if you think about it as a human being. War and not only like every kind of action of violations, it doesn't only help on bringing numbers of people being killed, numbers of people being injured. It's not about the numbers, it's the people. When you are injured or being separated from your family, it's for good. There is no future for that. When you are being bombed in like hours and hours, and you barely have to hide from snipers. People, unfortunately, soldiers who have fun and even have kind of making trends even over the internet about killing and bombing. A lot of videos have been circulating about the kind of action these militaries are been doing, and that's need to stop, because on the other side of this kind of launching these trends and these kind of bombing, there's people actually being displaced, being bombed. This is kind of unfortunately, it's becoming harder and harder to speak. As a Syrian who have a lot of Palestinian friends who unfortunately been displaced, who were grown in Syria itself, most of them knew that they are Syrian Palestinians and they never knew their homeland. And unfortunately, with this new years, also the past 2 years, more and more people, unfortunately, were born and being also displaced as a babies. They will never know what's Palestine it is. And as a Syrian who came here as a refugee, it's always give me this kind of the perspective of that. No one decided to be displaced. No one decided to be a refugee. Unfortunately, we've been forced to be here. And that's not the nature of our humanity. We have to make decisions on our own self to make the right if you want to stay in your country or not. So this kind of irregularity of what's happening has to at least have more and more bigger impact on the ground. Luckily, at least we are witnessing a waking up of what we are witnessing as a global movement of what's happening. But unfortunately, the war is still continuing. So that's something that, as an activist, I see it that if we just take 1 second or 1 minute away or stop it, it will continue. So we have to keep pushing. Hope is what we are keeping us moving. I'm seeing a lot. We all saw a lot of Palestinian activists, even under bombing, still like trying to share the messages, go live, even with the lack of internet. That's not easy, of course, but sharing their messages is the most also important, because under the pressure of the bombing, under pressure of a father who's trying to his best to secure food, secure a safe place for his family, will feel that he's left alone. The family will feel that left alone. But together with us, when they see that internationally we are trying to do, globally we are trying to do something on this world, it's also give them hope to continue to find like a glance of hope, like my colleague Imad was saying. I don't want to talk more about what other colleagues have been mentioning, but also kind of like the emerging that we are doing as activists on the ground, activists here in Europe. Even unfortunately, most of the people who's been displaced from Palestine, they are still going, and every single day in Brussels, even in every other city, and that's what we need. We need to continue with this, but with that also we need to keep pushing our governments to act on the embargo, act on stopping any kind of like weaponry has been delivered, unfortunately, or at least this kind of like generalization that's been happening there, unfortunately. Don't want to take more time. Chris, I want to go back to you.
Thank you, Artino, now for bringing, this intensely personal and political together, which is very hard to do, and you did it so well. But before we get on to the second round, I want to ask Chris, my co-moderator, because he's been one of the major organizers of these huge rallies. I really want to ask you, Chris, one, how did you? I know it's they were such a success, but what brought all this together, and how can we sustain it and keep it going? Because it has become like a case of people versus hegemony. How do we keep this on?
Yeah, thank you, Anu. Well, of course, I was not the only organizer. Many of my colleagues have been involved, but I think what is important is that you really try to build a broad coalition and bring many organizations together I think for June 15, we were like 150 organizations that were supporting the call to come in the streets, and we're the say something red to draw a red line for Gaza. And I think as I was part of the crowd control person, and many people came spontaneously to me and to my colleagues, thanking us for organizing this, because people feel angry, feel frustrated that their leaders are not doing anything. And so they said, yeah, at least now we can come in the streets and we can show our frustration and our anger, and we can be here together in solidarity. And we feel good that to be surrounded by so many people. So I think people feel the need to do something. So I think it's up to us, civil society organizations, to give this to give them this leverage, to give them this opportunity. Now, in European summer, it's not easy to continue organizing, but we will do smaller actions throughout July, August, and then we are calling for a new mobilization in September. Hopefully by then we could only hope that let's say some kind of ceasefire has been reached, but of course we all know that this will not be the end, and we will have to keep on put more pressure on our policymakers to do more than to really investigate what has been happening there and bring let's say the perpetrators to justice. So that will be this struggle will go on. I can talk many more about I think the need to organize. I think we all the speakers have been very outspoken about that. And I actually, because we have Professor Akar here, I really, because you gave a bit more historical background in the first round, but I really would like to hear also with your analysis what is going on now and what could happen in the coming weeks, months. Do we go to some kind of ceasefire, or is this kind of utopia in your opinion?
Yes, thank you. Well, to start with your question very straightforwardly, what we can see are truces, not peace, right? So you may have ceasefires, as you have had previously in Gaza, or now between Israel and Iran, but this is not peace. These are just temporary lulls in the conflict, and this can reignite at any moment. Now, what I want to emphasize, to avoid any illusions, and sorry if I disturb the optimism of some, but there's nothing to be expected, nothing positive to be expected from a number of the states that are involved. I mean, the Gulf states have been, aside that some of them are very openly collaborating with the Israeli state and have normalized, between quote marks, their relations with the state. These have been watching the genocide going on in Gaza without doing anything serious. Just compare their behavior with what they did in 1973 in the war between Israel on the one hand and Egypt and Syria on the other. At that point, especially that you had the right-wing government of Sadat in Egypt, they solidarized, they acted in solidarity with Egypt and the Assad Syria government, and decreed an oil boycott, which was a major shockwave in the global economy. They could have done the same this time, but they haven't done anything. So they didn't use this weapon of oil, which is the main weapon that they have. And they could have threatened, even the threat of that would have exerted strong pressure on Western countries and on the United States in particular to stop this genocide. They haven't done anything like this. In the same way, if they condemn the Israeli strikes on Iran, this is actually quite hypocritical, because they are actually, in fact, happy, even though they can't say it because they fear Iran's retaliation, but they are happy for the destruction of Iran's capabilities in the region. The Saudi kingdom, in particular, has regarded the Iranian regime since inception, since 1979, as a major threat to itself. And now this Iranian regime itself, I mean, we have seen how muted their reactions have been towards the United States in particular. I mean, this last attack on the US base in Qatar led to some really first historical instance of the attack thanking the attacker. Donald Trump thanking the Tehran for the advance warning. That's at the same time we see the Iranian regime now operating a full crackdown on any opposition circles in Iran, and that is targeting mostly the Kurdish area of Iran, from where the Mahsa Amini, the women's movement, started. So no confidence in any of these regimes. And as for the European states, they are also all hypocritical. I mean, they have all endorsed, I mean, the major ones, Germany, Britain, France, endorsed the Israeli first, the beginning of the Israeli genocide. At least for the first year of the genocide, they were supporting Israel. They were even opposing any call for a ceasefire. And then when it comes to the Israeli attack on Iran, they endorsed it. They said that it is legitimate. So nothing to be expected from these governments. And we can carry on. You know, Russia is certainly not, I mean, any kind of beacon of peace. Russia has been a major violator of international law in recent years. It has not only before Ukraine, it has for many years bombed Syria at a huge human cost for the population, and it has changed its nuclear doctrine into allowing itself to resort to a first use of nuclear weapon. That is the classical policy on nuclear weapons is we would use them if we are attacked by nuclear weapons. But now you have Russia saying even if it is facing a conventional war, it gives itself the right to use first the nuclear weapon. So that's extremely dangerous. So we're not, I mean, none of these powers, not to go further than that, not to think of I don't know, Narendra Modi's because if you say BRICS, you have Iran, you have Russia, you have India, and these are already three countries that are absolutely unreliable for any pacifist perspective. So the only hope, if we're speaking of hope, is in the mass movement, is in the popular movement. And I would say that what we have seen, even in the United States itself, and even among young Jewish protesters in the United States itself, is more of a reason of hope. I mean, the protest against the Gaza genocide than the position of any of these governments.
Yeah,
I mean, the only government that made something that was meaningful on Gaza was the South African government. With the action it took in the international arena, that was very positive. But most other governments are really hypocritical on these issues.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this, Gilbert. Nadine, would you like to add a few thoughts to, in a few sentences?
Not much, as this has been represented by Gilbert, but I just want to quote that now Indonesia is still one of the members of the Human Rights Council, and it is unbelievable on how Indonesia is also standing still when all this genocide is increasing, and when all this genocide is still occurring in Palestine, and when all of these children still have to experience this multiple damage that they should not have even felt, should not have even experienced at such young age. And we're very much disappointed on how Indonesia is now normalizing its ties with Israel, as they have also and always been stating that Indonesia will not have these diplomatic ties with Israel. And now, just 1 month ago, Indonesia stated that we can we can recognize this Israel so long as Israel recognize Palestine. So this is horrible to see that Indonesia is actually now a part of the right-wing global movement that we are seeing as one of the destructive movements of democracy, the destructive movements of human rights that we have been building for many, many years. And now Indonesia positioning as the Human Rights Council is very much placing more of the, or just destructing the whole Jenga system that we have been building. And we are seeing also, for instance, whenever we have these protest acts in Indonesia, all of this are being systemized as something that's should be protected more from the Indonesian government. So, for example, we had this very first massive protest in Indonesia back in 2024. It was done after the election, the general election in Indonesia. The police were visiting us, protesters, who were there with many, many children and stating that this should be dispersed because this is not, and this has not been following out many of the rules, many of the procedures. You haven't been sending out letters stating that you want to have this protest being done. And this is outrageous because whenever political actors want to have this sort of upcoming or sudden, not protest, but rally for the political campaigns, it is being allowed by the police officials, it is being allowed by the security officials. But when we want to voice out the cries from Palestine, we want to raise out the cries from Myanmar, from Congo, and many more, it is always and always being forcefully dispersed. And how none of the Indonesian political officers are stating any of these distressful events, and it is being normalized by the political officers, by the political parties, is again what I said in the beginning is very outrageous. So by Indonesia is now still being a part of the Human Rights Council member, we should be questioning their credibility. And by Indonesia is still being entrusted by the global community as the global leader of democracy, as the global leader for human rights, we should again question their credibility. So that's just an additional points from my end.
Okay, so
Thank you.
yeah, Chris.
Thank you, Nadine. Yeah, maybe also Emad, hey, the organization you are working for, Middle East Treaty Organization, one of your advocacy is to establish a weapons of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East. That sounds very utopian, but of course, I mean, the spirit is, of course, that all these weapons, all this weapon production, all this weaponry that's being used is creating all this, is destroying all these people's lives. Do you still can say sow the seeds of the spirit of say free weapon zone as a kind of, I mean, how do you try to build this narrative also in the communities in the Middle East? How do you try to reach out to them, and how do you communicate to all these victims in the Middle East, all these communities that are under threat now?
Thank you, Chris. And I have to say, Gilbert, you're right. The hypocrisy is all over, and there is no doubt about that. My position is to at least evoke some hope amidst this madness. And while mass movements are important, and Chris, I will get to the WMD free zone in a second, what I wanted to highlight is that you will see these coalition of hypocrites and governments at some point have to crumble under the weight of their own populations, which have awakened to the reality of what is happening in Gaza, but also across the region and the world in terms of inequalities, the injustices that we see. And for that, of course, we have to continue advancing the message and the clarity in terms of if there is a way forward, what would it look like? And I always remind my European friends that, you know, you guys kill each other in tunes of millions, 2 world wars, and still emerged from it thinking, is there a better way? And while there is a lot of ingredients that are missing in this equation in the Middle East, from the optics that I'm seeing, is that in addition to the mass movements that are required to continue putting pressure on our governments and other actors that are profiting or abating what is happening in Gaza and across the region, and allowing the Israeli government and its most important and possibly the key government that actually allows all of this to happen, which is the United States, that if we are able to find political avenues, let's go for it. One of them being, okay, can we get these governments together on a topic of weapons of mass destruction, eradication, to discuss it within the framework of UN? And I know that sounds like a dream, but can it be a possibility that they can sit down and still start talking to each other about the key challenges between them? But it doesn't stop there. We need to have advocacy that not just targets governments, but also goes into the people. And this is where we do our educational programs. This is where we have, for example, within the Middle East Treaty Organization, a program, one of the first, that highlights the victims of the use of weapons of mass destruction, may it be by Syrian government on the Syrian population, or Saddam Hussein on the Kurds and the Iranians, or the other uses, or the nuclear testing that the French did in Algeria, and the victims of those that across the region that we can refer to and bring their stories and elevate it. So there is an educational component, there's an advocacy component, there's a policy component, there is what we do in terms of public outreach, in terms of getting on the airwaves. And I encourage, of course, all of us to do the same. But we cannot just highlight what is bad. We have to find ways forward. And that is why I bring these examples of possibilities. And let me finish with a controversial point, which I think, because I'm also a South African, and I saw the fall of apartheid. And many people said the mass movements and the sanctions and the BDS movement imposed on apartheid South Africa played an important part. Yes, but there was another key component that brought the end of apartheid South Africa, and that was the white South Africans in South Africa. And I think here we have to acknowledge and really delve deep in ourselves to find bridges with the Israelis within Israel and outside, including the Jewish community, that says not in their name should these atrocities happen. And I think here is a key puzzle piece that we have, I believe, we have not worked enough on, which is that within Israel, within its population, the fact that they can't travel freely, they cannot even say that they're Israelis, the fact that the BDS is making an impact on their economy, the fact that they are seeing, as much as they want to be blind to it, that a few kilometers on the other side, there's a carnage happening in their name. That ultimately, that's one piece that can bring down the Israeli government and transform it or change it or find a better way that we can discuss how do we have a collective security. I'm not saying that it's an easy task. I'm saying that within the tools that we've got to have the international community, yes. We have to have regional actors, yes. We need to have the Islamic and Muslim world more united in condemnation and how they don't play their hypocrisy on continuing normalization without any compensation or any sort of like exchange in terms of rights for the Palestinians, that these are becoming transactional. So we need to go beyond that. And I remember when I was in Gaza, in 2011, before all of this, but still under siege, a dear friend of mine in Gaza told me, Ahmad, I'm glad that you guys brought us medical aid and so forth. But what we need the most from you is to continue this voice and take our voice and do not let us be in the dark. And I think that's the most important message that I received from my colleagues in Gaza, that do not let silence be fallen onto our cause, onto our misery. Let us make sure that we keep at it in terms of whatever actions we can take. And here is important. Yes, we can go to the streets and march. That's important. While you're there, connect. Find ways to converge. Your skill set, may you be an accountant, may you be a doctor, may you be a mother, has a role to play to highlight the desperation of the people of Palestine and across the region. Because it is that shared humanity and our shared experiences that can play a part in chipping at this wall of hypocrisy that Gilbert is bringing up, that this inequality, and ultimately the reality is that governments will fall, they will change. And it is our task to make sure that when they do, that in that vacuum, we bring in a ray of hope. And with that, I thank you again for this opportunity.
So thank you so much, Imad. And it brings out really, that I think civil society has understood the need for these broad rainbow coalitions. Of course, sometimes it's very difficult because, they don't understand differences. And I think the other very important point you made, Imad, which I hope Artino will take forward now, is the importance of voice and recording, because I know in our own, we had these citizenship protests in Delhi and in India, which were badly clamped down, and still some of our students are still in jail on account of that. One of the slogans was, "We will remember everything." So I think that applies for all this. And I ask now, Artino, before we open it for Q&A, to give his last remarks.
Thanks so much, Anu. I mean, it's definitely, I'm echoing Imad on that. Keeping the narrative is really important. Why? I mean, from my perspective, not only as an activist who worked with civil organization, but also as a human being, like the dictators or the government or the army who's trying to always take your rights, will play their role in changing narrative into their own benefit. And with this, it will change within the years. We will know that, unfortunately, if we don't keep going with this, we will see that, unfortunately, that the narrative has been changed, and there were rights in defending. And also seeing from this, if you see like how the media is working with this side, their own media, when it comes to the attacks, is that they always say it, even as a spokesperson, when they go into highlighting, let's say, an attack or something in the Gaza Strip, they always say, we defended our area, we were defending our people. Even the messages of Netanyahu is always sharing a message to Lebanese people when they were attacking Lebanon, and also when they were attacking Iran, they were saying like, to the Iranian people, to the Lebanese people, coming out as the hero who's trying to protect the people alike, and the government is bad. While it's not, unfortunately. But playing with this narrative, the hero narrative, is always something that every perpetrator will try to do. But with the awareness that's been globally that's been spreading, it's becoming more and more stronger. The students, the colleagues, I wish I'm back to be as a student again in the universities, because I've been feeling really jealous that actually it's making the move. It's spread in a positively from one area to another, and that's what we need. And like what Ahmad was mentioning, also going back to when I like in so hard areas such as Gaza, a lot of people will be trying their time to do their basic life, which is sometimes they need to operate in one medical room, and that's the end point of this kind of medical room. There is no kind of advanced ER. So with the help of other using internet, it was also helpful for them to guide them through complicated kind of medical operations. What I'm saying that because I was, as a war photographer, I was also subjected to 3-4 injuries that unfortunately at that time in Syria, in the siege area, I didn't have the kind of like the basic kind of help that I needed. But now that what a lot of people are doing is they are trying also to help via internet. They are trying to talk, communicate with the people via any kind of aspect, like Imad was also mentioning. I don't want to repeat many things, but I always want to say, like, really simple as it is, sometimes you may see it maybe changing the make a statement. In Belgium, when I go in my public transportation, if I want to go and visit a friend or something, I'm always wearing either the kufiye or putting the like something to just show that I'm in solidarity. So maybe it would see it that it's one individual kind of maybe it doesn't help. It will help. The more you encourage as an individual, it will make a mass kind of movement, and that's literally what happened with the Red kind of movement that we witnessed a few weeks ago. And I encourage people to continue with that. I know it's a long term, but it's a long term battle. Even though that we are now under roof, we are provided with a kind of a better life conditions. Talking here. Some people are being under bombing. So what we could do at least is to do something with this. Keep sharing, keep doing, sharing information. We have the internet. There's many activists from Palestine and from Gaza, even inside Gaza or Palestine, or at least outside in Europe. If we keep helping them, it will encourage. Unfortunately, the war, even if the war stops right now, the impact of the war, it won't end here. There's a lot of people gonna be on children, big generation, like 2 or 3 generation will be suffered from traumas, PTSDs, and so on. So we need this kind of support even afterwards. I never thought as a Syrian that the war somehow it will end. Our dictator will be stepped down. Of course, it's not that it was a hope. I didn't see it. So it might work, but at least we need to continue. The Palestinians have been fighting for 74 years, and they still continue to do that. Many of you guys, such a lot of colleagues I know, been fighting for this individually, and we need to continue with that. Go back to you as a Chris, and Nu, don't want to take more time of this.
Thank you, Artino. Trying to look at questions. Yeah, of course, the questions are, some of them are going in the direction. Yeah, what do we really have to do now? I mean, we are facing, of course, huge, strategic forces. Is there anyone who would, let's say, we have been talking a bit about community organizing, but maybe more at a global level, Gilbert. I don't know if you, what could be geopolitically speaking, what changes do we actually need to bring this sparkle of hope alive, and to move countries, especially those in the really powerful positions. How can we expect some changes there? Maybe not tomorrow, but let's give us a bit more time.
There are a couple of hands up. I can see Naseem Ahmed Malik and Teresa. So Naseem, do you want to ask your question, and to whom?
Yes, my question is to everyone. Just Gilbert said what is needed, As I said last time also, a lot of struggles from all the not the nation, not the governments, but the citizens of many countries, as many of us here also. They are all, everyone effort is for the peace. I think still there is one chance we see as a Swede working on this, from Palme to till now. I think the best solution we should work is to get rid of this veto right. Then everything will be fine. Nothing. We cease fires and everything. Every one of us has witnessed that many times. The governments, but the most important thing is to give a chance peace is to have this veto right back for the nations. That the
Okay.
countries, if you want democracy, we should have the democracy in the United Nations also. We can see the situation of United Nations. We can see
Yeah.
the
Thank
situation
you,
of ICJ.
Naseemji.
ICJ,
Yeah.
one has written also, Nobody respect that. So thank you very much. So I
Okay.
once again, my salute to everyone, Imad, Gilbert, and the last one, to that they for the efforts, and I pray for them that they should, the true words they are saying, you too also. So continue that. This is, we have the hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Naseem. Teresa Al Amin has her hand up. Do you want to quickly give a question or say something, Teresa?
Yes. Since I have been expressing my frustration in the chat with us in our webinar process, it is not organizing. Just to provide a context, I started in 1966, born in 1948. The Nakba is now 77 years old. 77 years since Israel removed the Palestinians from their land. We have not done the work that needs to be done. I really respect the International Peace Bureau, World Beyond War, and other organizations that are organizing country by country. We must build the mass movements country by country. Unfortunately, in the United States, the so-called peace movement is a white-led movement that does not work for DEI. There is no inclusion by Europeans in the US to include the people who are ready to fight. And we must do better to build the mass movements in our countries. There is no magic talk that is going to change the world. We must organize. We must build it brick by brick, each one reach one, each one teach one, till we have the level of
Teresa.
consciousness. No. This is just too frustrating that the experts come to talk to us, but there is no strategic plan. Let's do our work better. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. I think as we're nearing the end, I'd really request Chris to say a few words to sum up and to close this webinar. Chris?
I still see one hand.
Oh yeah,
Suravi.
Sauravya Gimre. Yeah, one more hand and then Chris. Sauravya, what's your question or your very brief comment?
Yeah. maybe the person is not able to talk right now. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Okay.
No, I think the hand is gone, right?
Yeah, it's gone.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I can only thank everyone, our honored speakers.
I'm so sorry, sir.
Sorry.
Sir, I'm so sorry to interrupt,
Okay.
but I was muted. So can I go ahead with my question?
Yes, you can.
Yes.
Please.
Okay, I'll keep it very brief.
Thank you.
My question is for Professor Gilbert. Sir, geopolitically speaking, the lack of escalation from the American side to the Iranian government, does that mean that there's a boost for the Iranian regime? And what type of impact does it have on the Iran's power projection in the region?
Will I speak?
Yes, please.
Okay, very quickly. I mean, it was a limited operation, but it was a limited operation complementing a much wider one. There is a full complementarity between what the United States did and what Israel has been doing for 12 days. So the few hours of the U.S. attack on Iran have been using weapons that Israel doesn't have. And that's where it is complementing it. And that was meant for that. And any idea that the United States was against the Israeli attack is a total illusion. I mean, Israel would never have attacked Iran without a green light from Washington. Never. Don't even hesitate in thinking about that. Now, if I may, just to end, as much as I agree with of course, any prospect of nuclear-free zone, I should say that there are limits to the call for instance, nuclear-free Middle East. Why only the Middle East? And secondly, even if you disarmed Israel and turned the Middle East into nuclear-free for the countries there, the United States, Russia, and all these powers would still have their nuclear weapons all around in submarines and ships and with nuclear warheads. So basically, what we should essentially be calling for is a nuclear-free world. I mean, that should be at the world level, not any single part of the world. Not South Asia alone, not the Middle East alone. Even again, if I'm certainly not for any action at the regional level, but I think the key point is at the global level. And secondly, it shouldn't be only about nuclear weapons. We should be for disarmament, global disarmament. There was just 3-4 years ago a call by over 50 Nobel Prizes in natural sciences, calling for a global disarmament of every country on Earth, diminishing their military expenditure by 2% every year, and dedicating this money to the fight against climate change, the fight against poverty, and the rest. And look where we are. We are today with NATO countries pledging to increase their expenditure to 5% of their GDP. That's absolutely huge. Absolutely huge. And this huge amount of money that is spent on means of destruction is spent at the expense of the fight against climate change, which is the real threat that all humanity is facing, and especially the global south, the fight against poverty, the fight against pandemics and disease, and a whole lot of things of this kind. So that's where we should focus our fight. International global disarmament, synchronized, simultaneous disarmament of all countries, reversing this very mad race to the increase of military expenditure.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Gilbert. Well, I think with these words, you took really the words out of my mouth, because I was about to say, indeed, where are we now with NATO committing to the 5% budget spending? Of course, we all know, I mean, me living in Belgium, I think we will never get there, but that's another discussion. Yeah, thanks a lot for your time, your valuable time. We didn't we didn't bring a world peace, but at least we have been reflecting about it. And I'm sorry for if people feel frustrated about some of, let's say, of the outcome of this this webinar. But I think we are all in our heart. We are all organizers. We are all activists. We all try to build up this this wall of peace, brick by brick, piece by piece. I think that's where we stand for, and that's where we're not gonna give up on that, never, ever. Thanks a lot, and hopefully see you next time at another webinar of APB or APF or whatever friendly organization. Bye-bye, see you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Anujji,
Thank you, Farooq Sab. Farooq Sab, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Keep us.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.